Millionaire CEO smiled. "Beat me at chess and I'll marry you." The black janitor defeated her in 3 moves. "Really? Is that the best you could hire?" Victoria Sterling didn't bother to lower her voice as she watched the man pushing the cleaning cart down the marble hallway of her company. The 42nd floor of Sterling Industries gleamed under the late afternoon lights when she made that snide comment to her assistant, loud enough for David Washington to hear every venomous word. David was 38 years old and never imagined that a simple job as a janitor would become the catalyst for one of the most epic acts of revenge the corporate world had ever seen. But at that moment, he just continued organizing his cleaning supplies with the same unshakable calm he had displayed for months. Victoria, meanwhile, was immersed in her solitary game of chess, a ritual she practiced religiously after every big deal. At 35, she had turned the company she inherited from her father into a $500 million empire, trampling anyone who dared question her methods or her authority. "Jennifer, explain to me how someone like that got through employee screening." Victoria gestured dismissively toward David without even looking directly at him. "I mean, look at him. He's exactly the type who usually causes problems." David stopped cleaning and looked directly at her for the first time. Something in his eyes made Victoria frown, a disturbing serenity that didn't match the submissive reaction she expected to provoke. "Sorry to bother you, Mrs. Sterling," David said in a calm, polite voice. "I noticed you're playing the French defense. Interesting move against the king's pawn opening." The silence that followed was deafening. "Jennifer," the assistant choked discreetly while Victoria stood open-mouthed. "How did a janitor know chess terminology? You play chess?" Victoria asked, her voice laden with disbelief and a hint of cruel amusement. "A little," David replied modestly, but his eyes sparkled with something she couldn't quite identify. Victoria let out a loud, arrogant laugh. How adorable. The janitor plays chess. She turned to Jennifer. "Are you recording this? We have to document this historic moment." A wicked idea began to form in her privileged mind. Victoria Sterling had always loved humiliating people she considered inferior, and here was the perfect opportunity to make a spectacle. "You know what, David," she said, pronouncing his name with exaggerated sarcasm. "I'll make you a proposal that will go down in the history of this company. If you can beat me at a game of chess, I'll marry you." The words echoed through the office like a bomb. Jennifer let out a horrified gasp while some employees passing by in the hallway stopped to listen. "Obviously, it's a joke," Victoria continued, laughing as if she had told the best joke of the century. "But it'll be fun to watch you try. What do you say? Do you accept the challenge, or are you going to pretend you have something more important to clean?" David remained silent for a long moment, his eyes scanning the board with an intensity that made something strange happen in Victoria's stomach. For a split second, she almost felt nervous. "I accept," he said simply, pulling up a chair. Victoria had no idea she had just challenged a man who held secrets, capable of turning her privileged life into a public nightmare. While she laughed at her own genius in humiliating an employee, David adjusted the pieces on the board with precise movements that revealed much more than they appeared to. There, in front of all the looks of contempt and cruel amusement, he maintained the same serenity of someone who had faced much worse storms and lived to tell the story. The match began with Victoria making her favorite opening move, the Queen's Gambit, with the arrogance of someone who had never lost a single match in all the corporate events she had attended. She moved the pawn with a theatrical flourish, smiling at Jennifer, who was discreetly recording everything on her cell phone. "I hope you at least know how the pieces move," Victoria sneered, leaning back in her leather chair as if she were watching a comedy show. "It would be too embarrassing if I had to explain the basic rules to my future husband." Cruel laughter echoed through the office, drawing more employees who crowded nearby to witness what they all believed to be an epic public humiliation. David, however, studied the board with a concentration that made something strange happen. In Victoria's stomach, a tiny twinge of nervousness that she immediately dismissed. When David moved his knight in response, Victoria frowned. It wasn't exactly the move she expected from an amateur, but she still kept her condescending smile in place. "Interesting," she muttered, more to herself than to him. "I learned." "By watching," David replied simply, his eyes never leaving the board. Sometimes you find that people underestimate what you can absorb when they think you're invisible. Something in the way he said that made Victoria hesitate for a split second. There was a calmness in his voice that didn't match the humiliating situation she had put him in. It was as if he was comfortable. "Jennifer, make sure you're getting all the angles," Victoria instructed, trying to regain control of the situation. "I want this video shared with every department. Let it serve as a lesson on how people with delusions of grandeur are put in their place." But as the game progressed, Victoria's smug smile began to falter. David not only knew the rules, he was playing with surgical precision that turned his every move into a small work of strategic art. His fingers, calloused from manual labor, manipulated the pieces with a delicacy that contrasted brutally with the brutality of his moves. By the 10th move, Victoria realized she was being systematically dismantled. Every piece David moved seemed part of a larger plan she couldn't see, as if he were reading 3 moves ahead while she struggled to understand the current one. "Where the hell did you learn to play like this?" she asked, her voice losing its mocking tone for the first time. David looked up from the board and stared directly at her. "My father taught me when I was 8. He said chess was like life. You have to think several moves ahead, especially when everyone thinks you don't stand a chance." "Your father?" Victoria laughed forcibly. "And what did he do? Teach chess at the local community center?" "He was an international master," David replied with the same unflappable calm. "He competed in tournaments all over the Pinamalamuts, all over the world until a car accident cut his career short. After that, he worked as a janitor to support his family. Funny how life repeats itself sometimes, isn't it?" The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria felt the blood drain from her face as the gravity of the situation began to sink in. She wasn't facing an ordinary janitor. She was being humiliated by someone who had grown up breathing world-class chess. "That's impossible," she muttered, but her voice no longer carried any conviction. "You're making this story up to check," David interrupted softly, moving his rook with the precision of a surgeon. Victoria looked at the board and realized her position was completely compromised. No matter where she moved her king, he would be in danger. Her hands trembled slightly as she desperately searched for a way out that simply did not exist. The employees who had initially gathered to witness her cruel amusement now watched in absolute silence. Some whispered discreetly among themselves, beginning to understand that they were witnessing something very different from what they had expected. "You don't want to give up?" David asked politely. "I can still pretend you won if you'd prefer. I know how important it is to keep up appearances." The offer, made with genuine kindness, was like a slap in the face to Victoria. He was offering her an honorable way out of the humiliation she had created for herself, and it enraged her more than any taunt could have. "Never," she spat, moving her king to what she imagined was temporary safety. "I will not be defeated by someone like you." David nodded respectfully. "As you wish." He moved his queen with casual elegance. Checkmate. Victoria's world collapsed in a single word. She stared at the board in utter disbelief, her eyes desperately scanning each square for a move that could save her. But there was no escape. She had been systematically destroyed in just 15 moves by a man she had despised from the very first moment. Jennifer's phone was still recording when Victoria knocked over her own king. The sound of ivory hitting wood echoed like a final sentence. The employees around them remained silent, all realizing they had just witnessed something that would completely rewrite the power dynamics in that company. Each new humiliation only strengthened something inside David that his oppressors couldn't see, a silent force fueled by the very injustice they tried to impose on him. What that privileged woman didn't know was that every act of contempt was writing her own sentence of defeat, and that the man sitting across from her held secrets capable of transforming her perfect life into something completely different. The video of the match went viral throughout the company in less than 24 hours. Jennifer, following Victoria's direct orders, had shared the images in all internal groups with a caption, "When you promise to marry the janitor and he actually wins, is that legally binding?" Victoria hoped that David's public humiliation would be the end of the story. Instead, it created something much worse: genuine curiosity about who this man was who had destroyed the most feared CEO in the city in a game of chess, Miss Sterling. Dr. James Mitchell, the company's corporate lawyer, knocked on her office door the next morning. "We need to discuss some legal complications related to yesterday's video." Victoria barely looked up from her reports. "What complications?" "It was a joke, James. I'm obviously not going to marry the janitor." "Well," Dr. Mitchell adjusted his glasses nervously, "the problem is that you made the proposal in a corporate setting in front of witnesses, and it was recorded. Technically, it constitutes a public declaration of commitment to marry. If he decides to sue for breach of promise—" "He wouldn't dare," Victoria interrupted with a cruel laugh. "He's a janitor, James. He probably doesn't even know he has legal rights." Meanwhile, 3 floors below, David organized his cleaning cart with his usual methodical calm. But something had changed in the way the other employees treated him. Where once there had been invisibility, now there were curious glances and respectful whispers. "Man, you really destroyed the Ice Queen," commented Mark from IT, approaching during the break. "How the hell did you learn to play like that?" David smiled softly. "My father always said that chess isn't about the pieces you have, but how you use the ones others underestimate." What no one at Sterling Industries knew was that David Washington wasn't just a former chess prodigy. He had a degree in business from Columbia University and had worked on Wall Street for 5 years before his wife's death forced him to take any job that offered stability and health insurance for his autistic son. The call came on Thursday afternoon. "David, it's Amanda. Amanda Chun, remember me?" Amanda Chun had been his classmate at Columbia and now ran one of the most respected law firms in the city. They had lost touch when life took them in different directions, but she had never forgotten the brilliant mind that used to solve complex cases during their studies. "I saw the video, David." Everyone saw the video. Her voice carried a mixture of amusement and professional indignation. "You're being underestimated in a way that borders on criminal. Do you want to talk?" The meeting took place on Saturday at a discreet cafe away from the business district. Amanda arrived promptly at 10 o'clock carrying a leather briefcase that suggested serious business. "First, I need to know, do you really want her to follow through on her promise?" Amanda asked directly without beating around the bush. David laughed for the first time in weeks. "Of course not, but I want her to understand the weight of the words she uses so lightly." "Perfect, because I have some interesting information about Miss Sterling and her business practices." Amanda opened the briefcase, revealing carefully organized documents, questionable employment contracts, filed harassment complaints, labor lawsuits settled with million-dollar payouts, and gag clauses. "She has a pattern of behavior that the courts would love to examine more closely." While Victoria believed she had closed the matter, David was methodically building a case that would expose not only her personal arrogance, but the entire system of privilege and abuse she represented. The interesting thing, Amanda continued, leafing through the documents, is that you have something none of the other victims had, a clear recording of her committing what could technically be considered marital fraud and racial discrimination in the workplace, all recorded with witnesses on corporate property. David studied the papers with the same concentration he devoted to chess. Each page revealed a systematic pattern of predatory behavior that Victoria had hidden behind financial agreements and legal intimidation. She's not just arrogant, David. She's criminally negligent in her treatment of employees. And now we have it all documented. The following Monday, Victoria encountered David in the hallway during her morning rounds. She couldn't resist the opportunity for another public humiliation. "Oh, look who it is," she said loudly enough for several employees to hear. "My future husband. I hope you're not planning our honeymoon because I have some bad news for you." David stopped, turned slowly, and faced her with that disturbing serenity she was beginning to hate. "Actually, Miss Sterling, I have some news for you as well. But perhaps you'd prefer to hear it in private." "I have nothing to discuss with you," Victoria replied dismissively, "unless you want to apologize for wasting my time with your charade." "It's not a charade," David replied calmly. "And it's not just between us anymore." For the first time since the chess match, Victoria felt a twinge of unease. There was something in his voice, a quiet confidence that suggested knowledge she didn't have. That afternoon, when Victoria checked her emails, she found a message that made her blood run cold. The sender was Chun and Associates Business Law, and the subject line was simply, "Pending legal matters, Sterling Industries." For a moment, as she read the first lines of the formal legal notification, Victoria felt the world sway around her. But anyone watching from afar would have noticed that it wasn't fear that made her hands shake as she held the document. It was the furious anger of someone who realized they had completely underestimated their opponent and now had to face the consequences of years of cruelty disguised as corporate power. The extraordinary board meeting was called for Thursday at 9 in the morning. Victoria arrived confident, expecting to discuss strategies for eliminating the problem of the troublesome janitor who had dared to sue her. What she found was an icy silence and faces that avoided her direct gaze. Victoria, Richard Hawthorne, her uncle and chairman of the board, spoke with a coldness she had never heard before. "We need to talk about some irregularities that have been brought to our attention." Amanda Chun sat at the head of the conference table, surrounded by open folders and documents arranged with surgical precision. At her side, David Washington wore an impeccable suit that completely transformed his appearance, no longer the invisible janitor, but a man who clearly belonged in that corporate environment. "Allow me to introduce my client, David Washington," Amanda said in a professional, cutting tone. "He holds a degree in business administration from Columbia University, is a former senior analyst at Goldman Sachs, and is currently an independent consultant specializing in corporate compliance auditing." Victoria felt the blood drain completely from her face. "That's impossible," she muttered, but her voice came out weak and unconvincing. "Oh, but it is very possible," Amanda continued, sliding documents across the table. "Mr. Washington has spent the last 8 months systematically documenting this company's illegal practices, fraudulent contracts, documented racial discrimination, proven sexual harassment, and labor violations totaling over $20 million in potential fines." David remained calm, watching Victoria slowly crumble. "Do you remember the first time you called me exactly the kind of person who usually causes problems? You were right. I do cause problems for people like you." "Every conversation we've ever had has been recorded," Amanda added, activating a digital recorder. Victoria's arrogant voice echoed through the room. Where the hell did someone like that get past employee screening? I mean, look at him. He's exactly the type who usually causes problems. The board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Richard Hawthorne massaged his temples, clearly calculating the damage to the family and corporate reputation. "That's not all," David said calmly, pulling a tablet from his briefcase. "I have records of 17 employees who were fired after reporting discriminatory practices. All received settlements with gag clauses paid for with company. Money to cover up crimes." The screen showed detailed spreadsheets, internal emails, audio recordings, and even photographs of documents Victoria believed she had destroyed. Each piece of evidence had been collected methodically during months of work as a janitor, a job that gave him access to offices, computers, and private conversations that no one imagined were being documented. "How did you?" Victoria began, but her voice failed her completely. "Invisible people see everything," David replied simply. "You talk in front of janitors as if we were furniture. You throw confidential documents in the trash without a second thought. You leave computers unlocked because you think help can't read." Amanda opened another folder. "We also have the text messages Miss Sterling sent to other executives mocking the uninformed monkey who dared to challenge her to chess. These messages were sent from her company phone, which constitutes use of company property for racial discrimination." The silence in the room was broken only by the sound of Victoria choking. Richard Hawthorne closed his eyes, realizing that his niece had destroyed not only her own career, but potentially the entire family reputation. "How much do you want?" Victoria asked desperately. "I can pay any amount. We can settle this discreetly." David smiled for the first time in the meeting. "We don't want your money, Victoria. We want justice and full transparency." Amanda activated her laptop, displaying a press release that had already been drafted. "In 2 hours, this story will be public. All the recordings, all the documents, all the fraudulent contracts. The media already has copies of everything." "You can't do this to me," Victoria screamed, completely losing her composure. "I built this company. I am this company." "You were this company," Richard Hawthorne corrected coldly, signing a document Amanda had prepared. "The board has voted unanimously for your immediate removal from all positions. Your access to the systems is revoked. Your corporate account is frozen, and you have until the end of the day to clear out your office." Tears began to stream down Victoria's face, not tears of remorse, but of pure anger at realizing she had been completely outmaneuvered by someone she considered intellectually inferior. "You know what the most ironic part is?" David asked, calmly, rising from his chair. "If you had treated me like a human being from day one, I never would have started documenting your illegal practices. Your own arrogance is what destroyed you." At that moment, as Victoria Sterling discovered that her privileged life was completely falling apart before her eyes, one question hung in the air. Is it possible that someone so accustomed to power and privilege can learn any lessons from such a brutal fall? Or is there something even more devastating waiting for her on the other side of this public humiliation? 6 months later, Victoria Sterling looked out the window of the apartment she had rented in a neighborhood very different from the one she used to live in. The newspaper headlines scattered across the coffee table told the story of her downfall. Former CEO convicted of racial discrimination. Sterling Industries pays $50 million in labor settlements. The janitor who brought down a corporate empire. The criminal case had resulted in 2 years of probation and fines that consumed most of her personal fortune. But the real punishment was social. Her former circles of friends had evaporated like morning mist, and no reputable company would hire someone with a reputation in tatters. Meanwhile, David Washington walked the halls of Sterling Industries with a completely different name tag, Director of Compliance and Diversity. The company, under new management, had offered him an executive position with a six-figure salary, an offer he accepted on the condition that he implement genuine inclusion programs. Mr. Washington, Jennifer, Victoria's former assistant, approached him with a report. The third quarter numbers show a 30% increase in productivity since we implemented the new diversity policies. David smiled, remembering how the same Jennifer had recorded his humiliation months ago. Funny how people work better when they feel respected, isn't it? The transformation of the company had been radical. The toxic environment created by Victoria had given way to a corporate culture based on real merit, not privilege or appearances. Employees once silenced by fear now contributed actively, and the company experienced unprecedented growth. Amanda Chun visited regularly to monitor the ongoing processes. David, I just received confirmation. The last of the 17 former employees who were discriminated against has agreed to return to the company with promotions and appropriate compensation. And Victoria? David asked without malice, just genuine curiosity. Trying to rebuild her life. She's working as a freelance consultant for small businesses, earning in a month what she used to spend in an afternoon of shopping. Amanda replied, pausing. Ironically, the work is teaching her humility for the first time in her life. That afternoon, David ran into Victoria in the elevator of an office building where she had gone for a job interview. The initial silence was broken by her. I wanted to apologize, Victoria said, her words laden with a humility David had never heard before. Not just for what I did to you, but for everything, for the person I was. David studied her. For a moment. You know what the difference is between us, Victoria? You've always measured people by what they seem to have. I've learned to measure them by what they really are. When the elevator doors opened, Victoria hesitated. Have you been able to forgive me? I didn't need to forgive you. David replied calmly. I needed justice to be done. Forgiveness was just a consequence. Today, 2 years after that fateful chess game, David Washington is nationally recognized as an expert in corporate diversity. He lectures at universities, consults for large companies, and writes articles that are referenced in the field. His son, who once needed basic health insurance, now attends the best private school in town. Victoria Sterling, meanwhile, has learned to live on a limited budget, work 60 hours a week on projects that barely pay her bills, and has discovered that respect must be earned every day, not bought with social status. Sterling Industries, renamed Equity Industries, became a model of corporate inclusion, proving that diverse companies are not only morally right, but extraordinarily more profitable. David Washington's story proves a universal truth, the best. Revenge is not to destroy those who hurt you, but to build something so great that the evil they tried to inflict on you becomes irrelevant. He wasn't satisfied with bringing Victoria down. He rose to a level where her opinion simply didn't matter anymore. While she tried to humiliate him for being just a janitor, David patiently collected the evidence that would transform his life. Every racial slur, every gesture of contempt, every moment of arrogance was documented and converted into fuel for an ascent she could never stop. In the end, Victoria Sterling tried to diminish David Washington but ended up proving to the whole world the greatness he always possessed. True justice was not just her downfall. It was a demonstration that prejudice is always a confession of inferiority on the part of those who practice it. If this story of intelligent revenge touched your heart, subscribe to the channel to discover more stories that prove the best response to prejudice is resounding success that leaves the oppressors talking to themselves.